I never imagined that my credit card would be responsible for the collapse of my marriage. My name is Jason. I'm 34 years old, and for nearly a decade I painstakingly built my credit score until I reached a near-perfect score of 820. It was hard work. Every bill paid on time. Every loan paid off ahead of schedule. All to ensure that when the time came to realize my big dream, opening my own restaurant in Denver, the bank's doors would be opened to me. What I didn't know was that while I was planning our financial future, my wife Rebecca was plotting something completely different behind the scenes of our life together. I met Rebecca during my last year at culinary school. She was stunning, intelligent, and seemed to share the same values as me about money and the future. At least that's what I thought during our first few years together. We got married after 2 years of dating in a simple but elegant ceremony, exactly as we had planned so as not to start our married life sunk in debt. Rebecca worked as a digital marketing consultant and apparently made a good living. We combined our finances, only keeping a few separate cards for surprise gifts and personal expenses. That's when I made the mistake that would change everything. I added Rebecca as an authorized user on my main credit cards. In the first few years, everything went perfectly. We saved together, planned our vacations in advance, and always discussed any purchase over $200. It was a system that worked well for both of us, or at least I thought it did. The first sign that something was wrong came when I started receiving notifications of substantial purchases that I didn't recognize. Initially, I thought it could be an error or even fraud. When I questioned Rebecca, she explained that they were gifts for important clients, investments in clothes for business meetings, or items needed for our apartment. The explanations seemed reasonable, and I trusted her completely, so I let it go. The problem is that these reasonable explanations have started to become more and more frequent. I noticed that card bills were increasing month after month, but Rebecca always had a convincing justification. A designer bag was an investment because it would last for years. A $700 pair of shoes was necessary to impress a potential client. Expensive jewelry was a unique opportunity she couldn't pass up. I was so focused on keeping my credit score impeccable that I started working overtime at the restaurant where I worked as a chef just to make sure all invoices were paid in full every month. After all, my dream depended on this score. One day, I received a call from the bank asking if I would authorize a significant increase in my primary card limit due to my excellent payment history. It was at this point that I decided to take a closer look at our finances. What I discovered left me literally breathless. Rebecca had spent more than $35,000 on luxury purchases in the last 3 months. Designer bags, designer shoes, jewelry, clothes from famous designers, all hidden in a secret closet in our closet that I rarely accessed. Meanwhile, our savings for the restaurant, which should have been close to $50,000, barely reached $15,000. A detail that would completely change my perception of the person I shared my life with. Confronting Rebecca was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. When I got home that night, I placed all my credit card statements on the dining table and waited. She arrived beaming, carrying 2 more shopping bags. His smile instantly disappeared when he saw my expression and the papers on the table. "Can we talk about this?" I asked, trying to remain calm. What followed was a confession I could never. Not only did Rebecca admit to the excessive spending, but she revealed that she had lost her job almost 6 months ago and was using my cards to keep up appearances while she looked for a new job. Nobody expected this, especially me. But the situation was even worse than it initially seemed. Rebecca wasn't just unemployed. She had developed a shopping addiction to deal with the anxiety and embarrassment of being fired. Luxury purchases served as a form of escape, a temporary validation that masked her feelings of professional failure. Through tears, she confessed that she had tried to quit several times, but always relapsed when a new promotion or launch appeared. Worst of all, she had hidden not only the dismissal, but also several billing notices that were beginning to arrive at our address. That's when everything turned upside down in our lives. The dream of owning a restaurant seemed increasingly distant, while the debts only increased. I suggested therapy for Rebecca and financial counseling for the 2 of us as a couple. She agreed, seeming genuinely remorseful and willing to work on her recovery. We hired a financial advisor who created a rigorous debt repayment plan. We sold several of the luxury items, although for much less than they had cost, and I took a second job to speed up the debt payoff. For a few weeks, I thought we were on the right track to overcome that crisis. The real turning point came when, upon returning early from an extra shift at the restaurant, I found our apartment completely ransacked. My first thought was that we had been robbed, but I soon realized something even more disturbing. All the luxury items we had decided to sell were gone, as were several of our cash savings that we had saved for emergencies. There were no signs of forced entry. I immediately called Rebecca, who didn't answer. His clothes were still in the closet, but his suitcase and personal documents were gone. She had fled with everything she could carry, leaving behind only a short note. "I'm sorry. I can't stop. It's better this way." The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and devastating discoveries. Not only did Rebecca take the luxury items and our savings, but she had also secretly applied for 3 more credit cards in my name, taking advantage of my excellent credit score. These cards were practically at their limit, with spending on luxury hotels, airline tickets, and international purchases. In a matter of weeks, my credit score plummeted from 820 to 580, and I found myself almost $87,000 in debt. The dream of owning my own restaurant was not only distant, it seemed to have been completely destroyed along with my marriage and financial stability. The following weeks were a real financial nightmare. I hired a lawyer specializing in identity fraud, even though I knew it would be difficult to classify the case as fraudulent, since I had authorized Rebecca as the user of my original cards. The first step was to file a police report and notify all credit agencies about the situation. Unfortunately, the news was not encouraging. As we were married and I had given her express permission to use the cards, it would be extremely difficult to dispute the debts. As for cards opened without my knowledge, there would be an investigation, but the process could take months or even years to resolve. Meanwhile, I needed to find a way to survive financially. I sold my car, drastically reduced all expenses, and moved into a tiny apartment in the suburbs of Denver to save on rent. He now worked 3 different jobs: as a chef in a restaurant during the day, an app delivery person on weeknights, and a waiter on weekends. Every penny he earned went directly toward paying off debts or basic living expenses. Sleep became a rare luxury, while stress and exhaustion became my constant companions. The dream of his own restaurant now seemed like a distant memory from another life. A small glimmer of hope came when, 2 months after Rebecca's disappearance, I received an unexpected call from a private detective who had been hired by another victim of my ex-wife. Apparently, I wasn't the only target in his financial fraud scheme. The detective had tracked Rebecca to Miami, where she was living under another name and already involved with a technology company executive. She had established a pattern: find financially stable men, gain their trust, exploit their resources, and then disappear. The discovery was devastating, but also strangely liberating. At least now I knew there was nothing I could have done to prevent the disaster. With this new information, my lawyer was able to strengthen the case against Rebecca, opening up the possibility of classifying the incident as part of a larger criminal scheme. Miami authorities were notified, and an interstate investigation was launched. However, when the police arrived at the address where Rebecca was living, she had already disappeared again, probably alerted by someone. Despite the frustration, there was now enough evidence to at least disprove the cards fraudulently opened in my name after our separation. It was a small victory amid a sea of debt, but it represented the first real step towards recovery. It was during this period of uncertainty that I met Martin, an experienced chef who had been in a similar situation years earlier when his former partner disappeared with the capital from the company they were building. Martin offered me not only practical advice on how to rebuild my financial life, but also a perspective I desperately needed to hear. Financial failures, even the most devastating ones, are reversible with time, discipline, and a clear plan. He helped me come up with a detailed strategy to reduce debt and eventually rebuild my credit. The question is not whether you will achieve your dream, he told me, but how long it will take and what version of that dream will be possible in the short term. With Martin's guidance and a lot of determination, I began implementing a rigorous financial recovery plan. The first step was to negotiate directly with each creditor, explaining the situation and seeking interest reduction or more flexible payment plans. Some companies were surprisingly understanding, especially after I presented police documentation of the case. Others were adamant, demanding full payment with exorbitant interest. For the latter, I needed to seek debt consolidation through a non-profit financial counseling agency, which arranged more favorable conditions that allowed me to at least breathe a little. The routine was brutal, waking up at 5 a.m., preparing simple meals for the whole week, working at the restaurant until 3 p.m., making deliveries until 9 p.m., sleeping a few hours and repeating everything the next day. On weekends, shifts as a waiter at a high-end restaurant provided generous tips that made a significant difference at the end of the month. Every small victory was celebrated. $1,000 paid here, an interest rate renegotiated there, a card finally paid off after months of sacrifice. Slowly, the mountain of debt began to diminish, and with it, the suffocating feeling of despair that had accompanied me since Rebecca's betrayal. In the midst of this daily struggle, I received news that would change the course of my story again. The restaurant where I worked as head chef was going to be sold, and the new owner was planning a complete staff overhaul. Under normal circumstances, losing your job would be devastating, but this time was different. The previous owner, impressed by my dedication during the years I worked for him and knowing my current situation, offered me a surprising proposal. He was retiring and selling the place, but wanted to invest in a new, smaller business and believed in my potential. He offered a partnership in a fusion food truck with a modest initial investment that he would cover, while I would provide my culinary and operational expertise. The proposal was tempting, but also frightening. Starting a new venture while still struggling to get out of debt seemed risky. On the other hand, it represented the chance to finally start building something of my own, even if on a much smaller scale than the restaurant I had dreamed of. After several sleepless nights weighing the pros and cons, and long conversations with Martin, who had become my informal mentor, I decided to accept the challenge. We signed a carefully crafted contract with protection clauses for both parties, and within 3 months, Fusion Wheels, our food truck specializing in fusion cuisine, was ready to make its debut on the streets of Denver. The first few months were a roller coaster of emotions and learning. We faced mechanical problems with the truck, difficulties finding the best places to park, and the constant need to adjust the menu to meet the public's preferences. But there were also moments of pure joy. Our first day with a line of customers, the first positive review on a local food blog, the moment we realized we had regular customers following us from place to place. The food truck didn't generate extraordinary profits, but it provided a steady income that, combined with my other jobs, which I kept initially, allowed me to accelerate my debt payments. Most importantly, it restored something Rebecca had stolen along with my money, my confidence and sense of purpose. The following year was marked by steady progress, both in business and in my financial situation. Fusion Wheels began to gain recognition in the local Denver food scene, being invited to corporate events, food festivals, and even weddings. Our specialty in merging French culinary techniques with Asian ingredients created a unique niche that attracted both gourmets and ordinary people looking for a different experience. Gradually, I was able to give up my job as a delivery driver and eventually my job as a waiter, dedicating myself full-time to the food truck and occasionally teaching cooking classes at a local community center to supplement my income. On the financial front, victories also began to accumulate. After almost 2 years of rigorous payments and constant negotiations, I managed to completely pay off 3 of the 5 credit cards that had been defrauded. The credit agencies eventually recognized some of the debt as a result of identity fraud, which helped gradually improve my score, which rose to 650, still far from ideal, but much better than the devastating 580 at my worst. I established a modest but essential emergency fund and began to look to the future with cautious optimism. He was no longer just surviving, was rebuilding. It was during this period of relative stability that I received an unexpected notification. Rebecca had been located and arrested in Seattle after attempting a similar scam on a local businessman. Apparently, her new target became suspicious when she noticed strange behavior and hired a private investigator, who quickly connected the dots and linked her to previous cases, including mine. Authorities contacted me to testify in the criminal case against her, who now faced charges in multiple states. My first reaction was anger and a desire for revenge, but after reflecting for a few days, I realized that the best thing for my recovery would be to seek justice, not retaliation. The legal process was long and emotionally draining, requiring multiple trips to Seattle for depositions and hearings. Meeting Rebecca again in court was surreal. She seemed older, smaller somehow, devoid of the aura of confidence and charm she once seemed to radiate. His eyes avoided mine, and when our eyes finally met during my testimony, I saw no regret, only cold calculation, as if he were weighing his next move. The final verdict came after 6 months, guilty of fraud, identity theft, and several other financial crimes. The sentence? 8 years in prison, and an order for restitution to the victims, including approximately $70,000 that was to be returned to me. The sentence brought a sense of closure, but also the realistic realization that he would probably never see most of that money. Rebecca had no significant assets. Most of her luxury items had been sold or were hidden somewhere inaccessible to authorities. However, the process had an unexpected effect on negotiations with my creditors. With an official conviction establishing the case as fraud, I was able to obtain much more favorable settlements for the remaining debts, including the complete cancellation of one of the fraudulently opened cards. Most importantly, the emotional healing process has finally begun. I had faced my past, and now I could focus completely on the future I was building for myself. With the legal issues resolved and the food truck thriving, I began to revisit my original dream, having my own restaurant. But the traumatic experience with Rebecca had taught me valuable lessons about patience, planning, and the importance of building safe structures. Instead of rushing to make the dream come true as I had originally planned, I decided to take a progressive approach. The first step was to expand Fusion Wheels to a second truck, allowing us to serve more locations and events simultaneously. I have personally hired and trained a small team of up-and-coming chefs, sharing not only culinary techniques but also lessons in responsible financial management. The growing success of the food trucks allowed us to establish a permanent central kitchen, initially just as a base of operations for the vehicles, but eventually began offering catering services for corporate and private events. This hybrid model provided the stability of a fixed space with the flexibility and reach of trucks. My partner, impressed with the results, increased his investment, allowing us to accelerate expansion. Every step was carefully calculated, every financial decision meticulously analyzed. You would never be caught off guard by a financial catastrophe again if you could avoid it. Parallel to the business growth, I continued my personal financial recovery process. With my income more stable, I established a rigorous plan to rebuild my credit, creating new positive payment histories with secure cards, strategically paying off remaining debts, prioritizing those with the greatest impact on my score, and constantly monitoring my credit report to ensure there were no new surprises. Progress was slow but steady, and 3 years after Rebecca's disappearance, my score had risen to 720. Not the 820 it had been before, but enough to start dreaming about more substantial financing again. It was at that moment that a unique opportunity arose. A small commercial space in the revitalizing Rhino, River North Art District area of Denver was available at a surprisingly affordable price. The place needed significant renovations, but it had the potential to become exactly the kind of boutique restaurant I had always imagined. After weeks of research, market analysis, and financial projections, I decided to take the step I had been dreading. I applied for a commercial loan to finance part of the acquisition and renovations. The rest would come from savings accumulated from the food trucks and an additional investment from my partner, who had become a great supporter of my vision. 3 months of intense renovations later, the Phoenix opened its doors. The name wasn't chosen by chance. It symbolized my own journey of rebirth from the ashes of financial and emotional disaster. The restaurant, with just 40 seats, offered an intimate dining experience with a menu that changed weekly based on seasonal ingredients available from local producers. The food trucks continued to operate, generating consistent revenue and serving as a mobile marketing tool for the restaurant. The integrated business model has proven to be more resilient than I could have ever imagined, allowing us to successfully navigate even the traditionally most difficult periods for new restaurants. On a particularly busy Saturday night, as I watched the completely packed restaurant, with the 2 food trucks also operating at different events around the city, I was overcome by a wave of gratitude and disbelief. The road to complete recovery from what Rebecca had done was neither easy nor quick. It took nearly 5 years of relentless work, daily sacrifices, and unwavering determination. But here I was, not just surviving, but thriving, with a successful business, stable personal finances, and most importantly, a new perspective on what really matters in life. The money lost was painful, but the lessons learned were invaluable. My story was no longer defined by betrayal and loss, but by resilience and reinvention. If you have followed my journey so far, you must be wondering, what does this story have to do with your life? Maybe you've never been the victim of financial fraud in a relationship, but we've all faced falls and betrayals at some point. The question is not whether you will face a disaster, but how you will react when it arrives. The ashes of a failure can be the most fertile soil for a new beginning if you're willing to do the work necessary to rebuild. What would you do if you lost everything tomorrow? Do you have a plan B? Or better yet, do you have the mindset to create a plan B from scratch if necessary? The obstacles I faced taught me that our ability to adapt is much greater than we imagine. We often cling to a single path to success when there are dozens of alternative routes that could take us to the same destination, or perhaps an even better place. Are you stuck with a single vision of what your life or career should be like, or are you open to the unexpected possibilities that arise in even the most challenging times? Rebuilding after a significant financial loss requires more than just discipline with money. It requires a complete transformation in your relationship to success and failure. During my journey, I learned that true security doesn't come from a perfect credit score or a large amount in the bank, but from the ability to consistently generate value, regardless of circumstances. What skills do you have that no one can take away from you? What value can you create even starting from scratch? These are the questions that really matter when we are building a truly solid foundation for the future. Rebecca's betrayal was devastating, but paradoxically, also liberating. It forced me to question all my assumptions about financial security and rebuild not only my resources, but also my mindset. What seemed like the end of my dream turned out to be just the beginning of a more robust and realistic version of it. And you? Are you waiting for everything to be perfect to start building your future? Or are you willing to start where you are, with what you have? The difference between those who recover from great losses and those who remain defeated is often not the resources available, but the willingness to take the first step, even when the path forward seems impossible. If this story has touched you in any way, if you have seen yourself reflected in the challenges I faced or the strategies I used to overcome them, I want to invite you to be part of this community that is building financial and emotional resilience together. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and let's continue this conversation in the comments. How would you deal with an unexpected financial loss? What strategies have you used to recover from setbacks in your own life? Share your experiences below. Your story could be just the inspiration someone needs to take the first step on their own recovery journey. Remember, no matter how devastating the blow, you always have the power to write the next chapter of your story. And I promise I'll keep sharing practical tools and insights to help you make this chapter your best yet.